The power went out, so we had a technical difficulty. We've solved it, and we'll continue with our great interview with Ed Hudgins. He's from the Atlas Society, and he's answering the question of whether he has a principle that he can use to determine when we should go to war or not. And since he's an objectivist, we're sure he's going to deliver.
Okay, well, a couple of things. First of all, the fundamental principle of any government is it should be protecting the life, liberty, and property of citizens. And governments do that to a greater or to a lesser extent. Some are completely repressive, North Korea, for example. Others are relatively free, Switzerland, the United States, even though it's declining, so forth. Now, what does that say about foreign policy? Well, there's no magic formula, first of all. Anyone who says there is incorrect. There's no thing where you can just say, well, we're going to plug these things in and that'll tell us whether to go to war, because it all depends on the circumstances, on the particular country, and so forth. There are a number of factors that go into this. But the bottom line is, to what extent does another country and their policies threaten the United States, the life, liberty, property of the citizens of the United States? Let's take a concrete example. North Korea. Now, up until recent decades, North Korea, as I said, was one of the worst places on earth to live. It is about as totalitarian and repressive a country as you can imagine. I would argue that its government is completely illegitimate. Anyone who would try to overthrow that government would be perfectly justified in doing so. Okay? Now, but does it threaten the life, liberty, and property of Americans? You can ask that in a couple of contexts. First of all, directly. Up until recently, it didn't directly affect the United States. Today, it might. Why? Because the North Koreans now have nuclear weapons. They're developing missiles that could hit the United States. Now, you might say, yes, but we're much more powerful than North Korea. But then you have to ask the question, do they have such an irrational nutball as a leader that the North Korean government wouldn't hesitate to go ahead and shoot a couple of nukes at the United States just to be contrary, even if they get nuked themselves? And you have to make those judgments. You have to make those judgments about the Iranians. They're religious fanatics. Would they particularly care if they started a nuclear war? So you have to make those judgments, okay? And
let me ask you, before we discuss North Korea and Iran, I want to get a clear answer to my question. So your answer would be that you don't have a principle.
There are principles.
And anybody who says they have a principle is mistaken.
There are principles involved, but there's no magic formula.
You don't have a principle that tells you when we should go to war and when we should not.
There's no magic principle. There's no magic formula, okay? There are principles involved that you have to take into account, but if there's nothing you're going to be able to plug into a formula and say, okay, here's what I come up with. Doesn't exist.
So do you think you can evaluate effectively without a principle?
Wait a minute, I didn't say there wasn't principles. I said there's no magic principle to tell, in this particular case, whether you go to war. There are a number of principles involved, but what you have to do is look at the specific circumstances. You have to...
What are those principles?
I said the principles are, to what extent does a country affect the security or threaten the security of the United States and its citizens? How can they threaten it? They can threaten the United States in a couple of ways. One is that they can have weapons that can hit the United States, nuclear weapons as the obvious example. To what extent can you assume that these folks or the government of a country is going to use those weapons? You have all of these things to consider.
Yeah, you can consider those things, but there isn't a principle that tells you in a particular circumstance what you should do and what you shouldn't do.
There's no such thing as a magic formula. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
If you're looking for one, you ain't going to find one. You're going to find principles that you always have to take into account. You got to ask, is this going to threaten the United States of America?
And you think it's possible to evaluate effectively without a principle?
I haven't said there isn't a principle. I said there are principles, but there are not magic formulas. And I think a lot of libertarians get hung up on this, okay? That I can tell you the principles are, does a country or does its policies threaten the United States, the life, liberty, and property of American citizens? And you might also say, what about the world community? Now, I'm saying that not in an altruistic way. I'm saying that It's in the interest of the United States to be in a certain kind of world. We want to be in a world that has a lot of Switzerlands. We want a world that has a lot of countries like that, as opposed to a lot of North Koreas.
Okay, so if we don't, if we estimate that the country doesn't protect its citizens' rights very well and is at a low level, then we can go ahead and make a military strike against them?
I didn't say that, did I? No.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out. So if they...
What I said is this. I said, you take a look at a country and you have to judge, for example, is this a long-term, is this a regime? Let's take an example. Let's take Paraguay, okay?
Okay.
Paraguay is a country that's had military dictators off and on for decades, okay?
Right.
To what extent did Paraguay threaten the United States? Not at all, okay? They didn't have a very strong military. They were military regimes were, you know, tenuous sometimes. They actually Stroessner was there for quite a while, but military regimes kind of came and went. It was unfortunate if you were a Paraguayan, okay? And you could say the same thing for a lot of Latin American countries that have gone through dictatorships. Did they in any way threaten the United States? Did they have a capacity to threaten the United States? Did they have an ideology that would threaten the United States or cause them to do something bad? And the answer was no. So it was okay for the United States to say, we don't like your policies, we think they're bad and so forth, but there's no cause for us to go to war and invade Paraguay or whatever.
So let me see if I get the principle. So you think that if you estimate that the country is threatening us, even though they have not attacked us and they don't have any plan to attack us, you just say, I think it's threatening because maybe they might in the future, like preemption. No. Then we can attack them.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
What? Okay, let me ask you this: what factors are necessary and sufficient in order for you to say we need to go to war? Because you say. Well, there is no magic formula. There is no principle that you can use.
I never said that. I said there are principles, but what I'm saying, and this is the problem a lot of libertarians have, is they're looking for some magic formula in a platonic realm, and there ain't no such animal.